Okay, good evening everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Policy Scrutiny Committee. Thank you all very much for coming. Just before we get into the agenda, because we've got members of the public in attendance, there is a brief note that I need to read out, so I'm just going to go straight through this now. So, this is a meeting of the Council held in public, but it is not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room and proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it is safe to return, the councillors will receive a text message. Officers will also advise when it is safe to return to the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. We are recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the Council's website following the meeting. Generally, the public seating areas are not filmed. However, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. Anyone intending to film or audio record any part of the meeting is asked to do so in a manner that does not disrupt the meeting. Please refrain from filming in the public gallery. Any questions on that? No. Good, thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to the agenda itself, and our first item is apologies for absence. And if you could just take us through.
Yes, of course. Apologies from Councillor Moore, who's being substituted by Councillor Sargent, and we also had apologies for Councillor Brown, who was due to be substituted by Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, Anne. So, item number 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from the floor? No. Councillor Myers.
Just a quick point, obviously this is to do with the local plan and policies, and it's going to affect everyone who's sitting here this evening.
Thank you for that. I have a non-registrable interest actually that I'll just, if I may just go through, Councillor Sargent, then I'll come to you, which is that no doubt we will be mentioning Ford Dunton at this meeting as one of our major local employers. I have a family member who works there, and I also previously worked there myself, and I am a Ford pensioner. So that is my non-registrable interest.
I know that the neighbourhood plans are not part of the local plan, but I will be referencing Notebridge, and I'm a parish councillor there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sargent. Okay. Any further declarations of interest? Councillor Robbins, declaration of interest before we move on? No? Okay, good. Thank you. So now we'll move on to the main body of the meeting, which is item 3, the review of the proposed draft local plan policy. So I think tonight presents us with a great opportunity at quite an early level to review some of the draft policies of the Basildon local plan. And I think it's a great opportunity for the committee to perform its particular function, which I think is to act as an extra pair of eyes along with the cabinet, former and current, along with the officers, to provide an additional perspective on the plan. So I think it should be a really good, a really interesting meeting. What I would say though is that we have got a lot to get through tonight. We've got about a 3-hour agenda, we've got 31 policies and 8 objectives to review. So on a mean average basis, we've got less than 5 minutes per item. So we need to bear that in mind. And what that means in terms of the way we'll run the meeting is, apart from a very brief introduction, which one of the officers will give us, we will not be referring, we'll not have time to refer to any of the content of the document that you've all had circulated, other than the actual policies and the actual objectives themselves. So we'll be going through those and only those. I'm also not proposing to read out the objectives and the policies in the interest of time, but to ask for comments on them as we go on a page-by-page basis. So that's my position on that. So won't read them, it's just really questions and comments from the floor. So in terms of, if I could just finish, Councillor Sargent, in terms of the members and their participation, what we really need tonight is for you to be as concise and precise as you possibly can be. To minimise repetition as far as is possible. Obviously, we're not in a situation here that like we would be in a normal council meeting where we're building up arguments and we come to a vote at the end of it and we vote on it. That's not the way a scrutiny committee works. So I guess if someone has substantively made your point, what they said is more than sufficient. And in overall terms, what I would request is that councillors minimise their comments on any individual policy to a maximum of 3 minutes. I mean, I think that should be plenty in terms of the comments we need to make, and obviously we need to do that to allow the officers time to respond. Any questions on that? Councillor Sargent, you had one, I think, didn't you?
Chairman, you said that we are only commenting on it because we're scrutinising the policy this evening. That's most important that we do. Yeah. But I've also got just 1 or 2 comments to make on the timescales. Will you permit that? Because that isn't policy, but that's the timescales.
Okay, well, my advice from the officers is that that's not pertinent for this meeting, or not something that we should be discussing here, Councillor Sargent, so I'm not able to permit that, I'm afraid. Thank you for your point.
Well, I thought that would have been the chairman's decision.
It is the chairman's decision, Councillor Sargent, based upon advice from the officers. So thank you for that. Okay, any further questions from the floor before we proceed? Sorry, could you press? Yeah.
My apologies. We're here to talk very briefly within 3 minutes regarding the
I'm
NDO.
sorry to interrupt you right at the start, but would you mind introducing yourselves and letting us know who you are?
My apologies. My name's Sheila Pegg. I'm a councillor with Bowers, Gifford and North Benfleet Parish Council. We came this evening to discuss some points on the NDO and not to scrutinise. So is that allowed or not?
Okay, I'm advised by the officers that that's not something that we would be discussing at this meeting. It's not part of the policies. So
We did, sorry, my apologies.
Yeah.
Can I just respond to that? We did request that we were allowed to do that before before we came this evening. Who was it that we asked?
I'm going to defer this to the officer. Thank you.
The matter with Scrutiny Committee tonight relates to the 31 policies that are set out in the document before you, and those are the policies that we have brought to scrutiny in advance of Cabinet for them to have a look at. The local development order is not one of those policies, so therefore the aims for tonight are to look at those policies. The local development order, the neighbourhood development order that you're looking at, is not a policy of the council and would form part of your consultation response if you want to the council's consultation on the local plan, and that would relate to greenbelt release. So that's how it should be dealt with at that point. But it's not a local planning authority policy, and it's not a requirement of the local planning authority. So therefore, we can't scrutinise that policy, that your neighbourhood development order tonight.
Okay, so one of the officers, Matthew Kay, is now going to give us a very brief overview of where we are in terms of the local plan before we proceed with the objectives and the policy scrutiny. So, Matthew, if I could pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Matthew Kay. I am interim policy manager, and I'm here with the team I'll introduce in a second. I just wanted to quickly highlight a couple of elements from the background just to give a little bit of a context. So you'll see that the local development scheme has a timetable set out, and then we're working through that timetable, working with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, the renamed Levelling Up department. We're working to deliver this. We're going to consultation in November, so that will be Regulation 18, issues and options, public consultation, so that's an opportunity for lots of detailed comments at that stage, which we'd really welcome. We are in a developing policy context, and these are also draft policies. So these policies, I just want to remind that policies have a particular way of being worded, which can be quite unusual. But we do have the policy officers here to answer the questions. The comments and proposals and anything mentioned by the members will be logged and will form part of our evidence base. So we're logging all of this, and we consider this an important stage in the road to the consultation in November and the subsequent local plan development and the timetable we're working to. I have Robert and Steph and Lisa who will be able to answer specific questions about particular target areas, and also we've got Eunice, Sonny and Liam as well if they need to be called upon, so we can answer detailed questions if needed. That's all I want to say. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'll just pass to Christine briefly.
What we'll do is that following the meeting tonight, we'll set out a document that will have what you said and what we're proposing to do with what you've said. So if you've made a comment with regard to a wording in a policy, we're going to amend that policy. We'll have a "you said we did" document that we'll then send round to you all, and that will very quickly be form part of this document, and then it'll be attached to the final minutes when they're agreed in October. But I want to make sure you've got access to those quite quickly. Then if any come back on us missing things or getting things wrong, you've got a chance to comment on those, because it's very iterative. We're trying to get the policies done as quickly as we can, but we don't want you to feel as if your comments tonight weren't taken on board and weren't actually properly recorded somewhere.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, so could we move now to page 15 of the agenda pack, which is where the objectives are located. So I'll open the meeting up to the members. Does anybody have any questions or comments on objective number 1 or on the objectives in general? Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to all the officers. Obviously, objective SO2, improving the quality and value of the green belt. We have here one of the housing target of 27,000 houses. 16,000 of those are going to be built on the green belt. I just wanted to ask the question: how are you improving the quality and value of the green belt if you're going to stick 16,000 houses on it in 20 years' time?
Okay. So if I'm understanding your point then, are you questioning the wording of the objectives or the sub-points, Councillor Myers?
So I suppose it's point 1, ensuring that land in the borough's greenbelt continues to contribute positively to the functions of the greenbelt.
Okay. Can I pass that to the officers for comment then, please?
Good evening, Councillor. So that one, we are taking the approach. First of all, we've looked at the capacity in the urban areas of the borough, and we've carried out a detailed urban capacity study, which has looked at how much of that housing we can get within Basildon Town, Billericay and Wickford. And then secondly, we're looking at the areas that we feel meet the definition of grey belt, which is now being raised as a potential green belt. So with green belt functions, it's not necessarily just this land was designated at one point as green belt, but does it currently function as green belt right now? And that's how well it performs against the purposes of the green belt. We will be evaluating all the sites. We've commissioned a Greenbelt study, which we're hoping will be published very shortly. That's nearly finished. And we've evaluated all the sites we're potentially looking at in the Greenbelt by how well they contribute to those functions. And that information will be available as part of the consultation to all consultees, as also to members when this is taken eventually to Cabinet and full Council. Does that answer? It does. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Does anybody else have any comments? Councillor Sargent.
Are you allowing us to comment on the vision, Chairman? It isn't a policy, but it's the policy vision.
Which page are you looking at there?
That's on page 15.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, I'd like to ask who set the revised local plan vision, and is it possible to deliver on the promises that are within the vision? And then I've got a couple of questions on SO2 and SO3.
Okay, I'll pass over to Christine for the vision question. Thank you, Councillor Sargent.
Councillor Sargent, the vision was set out in the issues and options document that was put together and went out for consultation. So that vision actually has been out for consultation, and that was put together last year, working alongside Councillor Moore. So the vision is was consulted on, and that is the vision that went to consultation, and the vision did not change during that consultation process. There was no comments on the vision.
I'm only asking that because it does say that the revised vision, that's why I said revised. So if you're saying there's nothing revised, then that's fine. There aren't any. And my other question was on the delivering the promises, but if that was in the last one as well.
Apologies if I just add to that. The vision was taken out to the issues and options consultation. One thing we did get a strong comments on was that it didn't give enough emphasis on protecting and enhancing the natural environment. So the vision is broadly the same, but we've added a little bit of emphasis on that. So this proposed draft vision, it will go out again to the Regulation 18 draft local plan consultation. So there'll be an opportunity to comment both for residents and all consultees at that time. And then we will look at a final vision coming forward next year as part of the Reg 19 consultation. Thank you.
And you had some additional comments on the actual objectives, Councillor Sargent.
SO2, improving the quality of the green belt. I think that's probably the same question that that Councillor Myers just asked. With all the additional houses, so that's been answered. And on SO3, the minimising of the flood risk, why protect only the highest quality agricultural land?
Thank you for that. Can I pass that question over to the officers, please?
The types of agricultural land that are within the borough are class 3 and class 4, grade 3 and grade 4. Grade 4 is not the most higher quality. The grade 3 is, but it's separated into A and B, and we don't have that information. So the idea is that people would need to provide additional information if their land was of that grade, and the NPPF steers toward protecting the most and best use of agricultural land.
Can I just come back?
Sure.
Will that be made clear when the actual local plan goes out, so that residents pose their questions in the correct manner? Because obviously that looks like you're only it's only the highest quality that matters, whereas there is a reason behind it, and that's what you're saying.
There is supporting evidence base that we've got that goes into more detail. Some of the preamble to the policy within the plan also has further detail on it, so it should be clear, hopefully, to there is a policy as well within, in case that wasn't clear.
Yeah, I've just got a comment to add to Councillor Myers and Councillor Sargent's point there about the green belt. You're quite right. I would say that these objectives were drafted prior to the NPPF consultation launch recently. Our intention was that we would be relying on the National Development Management Policy document that the previous Conservative administration was proposing to introduce. In light of those changes now, we've got to add some further policies around green belt and grey belt. But again, that is still work to be done, but we are aware of that. Reviewing this document, you'll have seen that we don't have anything in there at present. So we are taking legal advice on grey belt because it's not clear at this time exactly how we could go beyond the national criteria on that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Sargent.
Thank you to the officer for that. That's very helpful. He did mention, which does go on a number of policies throughout the document that are not ready yet. And I just thought I'd bring it up during this opportunity to ask what is going to happen. The documents that are not ready, the report refers to them being ready in August. Will they be ready for the actual plan that goes out for consultation? Because we are unable to scrutinise, or will there be another opportunity for us to scrutinise those policies? Thank you.
We'll pass that question on to Christine in a second, Councillor Sargent, but I think the fact that we've got an early sight of these draft objectives is a good thing, and in some respect, and is not optimal in others, and that, I guess, is one of them. But I still think on balance it's good that we've got a chance to look at these early on. But in terms of the specific timing, I will hand that over to Christine.
In terms of, so what you've got in front of you is 31 policies. There are probably about another 8 that we are still working on, and we're working on those because there's been some, obviously they were changes through the NPPF and changes with the new government, so those are being worked through to make sure that they are near enough NPPF compliant when that new NPPF obviously will be adopted following the consultation. So those will go to cabinet. So the cabinet report obviously will come out and they'll be viewed on cabinet. They will not be coming back to scrutiny because obviously we are on a very tight timescale. We have to get a draft plan has to be with for its environmental assessment by September. To meet the deadlines that we've been set and have been set in our local development scheme for the consultation of a draft plan by November. Now the draft plan will give obviously everyone opportunity to comment and to make suggested alterations to policies. And again, we will have to do you said we did part of that consultation approach. So you aren't taken out of that process. So every member will still have the opportunity to do that. And obviously it is again going to cabinet and then to full council. So there is the opportunity hopefully not full council, but it will be part of a cabinet report. So you will see the full policies at that point.
But that's the whole point of scrutiny, is bringing it to a scrutiny committee, and I wasn't allowed to comment on the timetable, and that's what you've actually said. It is very tight, and that's why I was going to comment. It could be too tight that we can't get the policies in before the scrutiny committee, but I take that on board. There's nothing we can do about that, but I've made the point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. That's noted, Councillor Sargent. Any further comments on the objectives? Councillor Myers.
Thank you very much. So, excuse me. I'm fairly okay with SO4, SO5 and SO6 in terms of the range of new houses to meet local need. Obviously, we were in agreement that houses are needed. SO7, mitigate against the impact of climate change. Designing new developments to be energy and water efficient. I mean, we've been saying this for years, that all new buildings should already come together with solar panels and hot air source pumps built in, rather than building humongous solar panel farms on fields, which could be used for agriculture. If you do it everywhere like that, or on big businesses with the economic development side of it as well, on big warehouses, they could pump it in as well, rather than having I think one case in Kent was the size of 86 football fields. How much of that is farming land? And that's the particular issue that I think we have here with colossal amounts of open space to be done for that. So I just wanted to make clear that are we suggesting that with SO7, with all new developments, that they must have all of this technology built in to begin with before we even consider any more massive solar farms to power 16,000 houses, because they won't need that because they're already on built.
Just before you respond, guys, can I suggest that we wait until the policies for reviewing that, because I think there is quite a lot of detail in the policies on heat pumps and such. So I would suggest, your point's noted, Councillor Myers, thank you for that, but I would suggest we wait to have a more specific discussion at that stage, if that's okay. Yeah.
So, excuse me, SO9 and SO10, and I'm sure these will come up in the policies as well. So SO9 is enhancing the quality of life for all, and SO10 is securing the delivery of supporting infrastructure. Of course, with SO10, prioritising new development in well-serviced locations. I don't necessarily disagree, however, new service locations and the bit next to it saying ensuring new developments are supported by the necessary transport, utility, green and blue, education, health, etc., etc., etc. We don't really have well-serviced locations. Generally, I mean, with the developments going forward at the moment, you can see that the money that the NHS is asking for, the money that the Education Authority is asking for, isn't enough to sustain the level of development that is already currently going ahead. So I just wonder if we make clear, and I'm sure this will come up at the policy stage, so I'll leave it at that, but just based on the objective that we make sure that some of this stuff comes forward first to serve the existing service locations before they actually start building. And then, of course, it relates to SO9, enhancing the quality of life for all. That also includes existing residents who live there in terms of what is needed in the area.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. That's noted. Any further point? The floor. So I have got some comments I'd like to make at this stage. Some of them more general and some of them specific. So, in terms of the more general ones, I would like the officers to review the extent to which these objectives are specific and measurable, particularly measurable. When I have got some specific points I'll pick out in a second, but I think in general my feeling is that we could do more to make them specific and particularly measurable. So if I could ask for that to be reviewed, I would appreciate it. I also think it would be helpful if we had some kind of tabulation, cross-correlation, whatever you want to call it, between the objectives and the actual policies. Because at the moment, it's not clear which policies are linked to which objectives and whether, therefore, they are aligned and complementary. So I think it would be useful to expand this table so we can see the policies that refer to the objectives and satisfy ourselves that it's one continuous smooth flow. I think this table would benefit from some headings. At the moment, I can draw my own conclusions as to what the two columns mean, but I think that needs to be spelt out. I think headings are absolutely critical to the understanding of a piece of data. And finally, again, sorry, this is going to sound a bit strange, but I'm not sure why these are all worded in the present continuous tense. So protecting and enhancing the quality of the local environment, to me, it's protect and enhance rather than protecting and enhancing. That's our objective. So I would suggest that's changed, but, minor point there. So in terms of the specifics, on number 1, protecting and enhancing the quality of the local environment. So we talk about conserving heritage assets and enhancing the distinct character and sense of place of each area of the borough, which I don't object to in principle. I wonder whether there's something missing here in terms of best practice that might be shared amongst different parts of the borough. So there might be something that's been done particularly well in Langdon, which could be shared elsewhere, that wouldn't necessarily be in line with how we would perceive the character of that area presently, but might enhance it moving forward. So I'd like us to consider that point. On objective number 2, quality and value of the green belt, I mean, my understanding here is that what we're talking about is making sure that the green belt that we've got does what green belt does well. And I think we could improve the wording of the right-hand column in order to support that. So the first 2 points on that, I think, without going into too much detail, are not written in improvement language, they're written in sustentation language. So I think if our objective is to improve, then our supporting points also need to talk to improvement. And the last point regarding maximising use of previously developed land for development, I'm not sure that's aligned with the objective, to be honest with you. I'm not sure that's a green belt point. That's perhaps a pertinent point, but not under this objective itself. On maximising our impact on the environment, again, I think my point about specific and measurable objectives comes in here, but to a degree almost in reverse. So we say seeking to deliver more than 10% biodiversity. I mean, you're going to get 10.1% improvement if that's your point. So we need to be absolutely clear that 10% is what we need and what we're looking for, because that's, if we say 10%, we're going to get 10%. That's
legislation at the moment.
Good. 10%. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks very much. Okay, objective number 4, vibrant and thriving town centres. I think I understand what the first 2 bullet points are trying to get at here, but again, I feel that they could potentially be better worded. So we're saying here, enable Basildon Town Centre to grow and change, offering new opportunities, etc., and conserving the distinct identities of Billericay, Wickford, Pitsea and Langdon town centres. I think one of the points, the hard points that we're dealing with here is Basildon Town Centre is the only one where we have the physical scope to make significant differences in how it actually operates. If we look at our other town centres, they're quite geographically constrained, and our ability to change the character, the note of those areas is somewhat limited. So I would suggest that we amend the wording slightly to, if people agree that that's what we're actually getting at, in order to reflect that point. And again, my point on identities comes in here. There might be something about the identity of Pitsea that would improve Billericay or vice versa. So I think I understand the positivity of trying to maintain distinct identities. But I think there might be room for cross-fertilisation as well. Okay, in terms of objective number 5, strengthening the competitiveness of the local economy. So we talk about allocating land for growth, and that's absolutely right. A point I would make here is that we've got some major strategic assets in the borough, and I'm thinking particularly of Fort Dunton, which, as I understand it, perhaps not now, but certainly at one point in the past, was the biggest research and development facility in the United Kingdom of any description. With 4,000 people working there in highly skilled jobs. We've also got the tractor plant. So I would like to see the wording reflect the importance of maintaining our existing assets as well as building on them. And finally, in terms of mitigating against the impact of climate change, this is an area where I would like to see us be a little bit more specific and measurable in terms of particularly the first 2 bullet points, which are along the correct lines but aren't quite specific or as specific as I feel that they could be. So that's my comments. Thank you. Any questions on those? Yep. Okay, so we'll now move on to... Oh, sorry, Councillor Sargent, I didn't see you put your hand up. Over to you.
Sorry, Chairman, I'd forgotten a comment I'd like to be taken into consideration on SO2 about the green belt. Can we add to the policy, we shall continue to protect the green belt? Because the council has always had a policy, and that does protect the green belt, and that doesn't mention it on there. Thank you.
Okay. Can I pass that to the officers for comment?
Yeah, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the reason that we don't have one at this point was because of the proposed National Development Management Policy situation. So the intention was that we would rely on that, but we are working on green belt and grey belt policies within this document. They will be in the version that goes out to consultation.
Would that mean, Chairman, that we can no longer protect the green belt in the future?
Rather than pass that on, if you don't mind, Councillor Sargent, again, I think that's something that's covered within the specific policies, and I would suggest, while we've got a little bit more written information there, that we wait until we get to that point before we address that point, if you don't mind. Okay, can we now move to page 19, please, which is the first policy, SG1. Any further comments on that one? I mean, there's been some points already, but I'll pass that over. Councillor Myers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's this calculation of houses for 20 years, 27,111. That is more than Billericay and Wickford combined, which have had centuries to be where they are now. And I can't see how these can even be deliverable in 20 years when there are difficulties in workmanship shortages, construction materials shortages. We've seen before with lots of our developments that have been approved by planning committee that haven't gotten started, and yet we failed to meet our 5-year housing land supply, which is why we're in the position where we're in. Mainly due to viability, mainly due to costs. I honestly can't see how this council can deliver 27,111 dwellings in 20 years. It's just impossible. It's ridiculous. Especially considering a minimum of 10,420 affordable homes. So again, that comes into the viability side of things. Of course, developers, in order to make their money, want everything to be private ownership because they can say what the price is going to be. And yet, with affordable homes with shared ownership and excuse me, social rent, obviously their markup then goes down, and they can't find the people, the materials to do this, especially when this is happening all over the country as well, with massive housing targets being introduced by the current government. It's just not sustainable. So in terms of making a plan sound, which it has to be, how can we guarantee that what these numbers here we can do in 20 years, or an inspector's going to go, no chance, you're not going to be able to deliver it? And that's a question for soundness of a policy, of a plan. Are you going to be able to deliver what you're saying the target is within that local plan timeframe? So I have concerns about that.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. Christine, do you want to take that one?
Can I just deal with the comment with regard to affordable housing? On all the schemes that have been granted in the Greenbelt on appeal, and the one that was granted at Southend Road by the council, all those schemes delivered 40% affordable housing and significant infrastructure. All of those schemes have delivered £6, £7, £8 million of infrastructure. So the schemes that come forward in terms of the large schemes, and if they are an allocation that comes to the local plan, we have to do all plan viability, and they have to be viable. One of the grounds you'd have an allocation come forward in a plan, it has to show that it's deliverable in the timescale set out, and it's completely viable. Developments will not get through the local plan process in terms of an allocation if they can't be proven. So that work we are doing at the moment. So what the sites that are going to come forward within this plan will be sites which will be option sites. So there'll be a number of sites coming forward that will deliver around about the number we're looking at, and there'll be work done to all those sites to prove they are by the developers, to prove, and working alongside us, to prove they're developable and developable within the phasing part of the local plan where they're supposed to come forward. We have to prove to inspector that we've got 10 years worth of schemes that can come forward in the first 10 years. the rest of the rest of the delivery, so the second half of the delivery, we have to prove we've got land available for it to come forward in that process. So we haven't got to prove to an inspector to make the plan sound that 20,000 new homes can be delivered, sorry, 27,000 homes can be delivered in the 20 years. We have to prove we've got land for 27,000 new homes, but we have to prove that within the first 10 years we can deliver half of those. And we have to set the full phasing plan out to show that, and also it has to be viable. Otherwise, the plan will not be sound.
Thank you, Christine. Councillor Sargent, you had a point.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of points on SG1. I've got concern on the Gypsy and Traveller pitch numbers, which at this stage that policy is not going to be available, and that really is concerning. When will those? Do the officers know when those numbers will be available? Because again, we won't be able to scrutinise to ensure that they are the correct number. So that's one point, and the other point is in relation to the 16,928 new housing allocations on the green belt, which is a minimum requirement. Do we really feel that we want to put 16 or nearly 17,000 homes as a minimum on the green belt?
Okay, could we have the input on the first one when we're expecting to hear on the missing data? Lisa, can you help us with that?
Yes, so an updated Gypsy Traveller and Travelling Show People needs assessment has been commissioned, and that's been commissioned on a South Essex basis. We have had the initial figures back and we are reviewing those at the moment, and we're also undergoing some further work with our neighbouring local authorities and also with the planning inspectorate on how we can best assess that and meet that need. So there will be a policy and consequently a figure in here when this goes out for Regulation 18 consultation.
So no scrutiny on that, Chairman?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
Can I just come in on that point?
On that point, yeah, for sure.
Everything that goes in the local plan has to be evidence-led. So if the evidence that comes back from our consultants and that we've tested, and we are testing, and that's why we haven't got a figure, because we're testing it ourselves and we're going out and doing some further work ourselves. Everything in terms of the number of Gypsy and Travellers, the number of housing, is tested and it is evidence-led. So if that figure is that figure, we have to work with the evidence-led figure. We can't come to scrutiny and say, do you like it, yes or no? The answer is that is the figure we have to work to. It's not an option, because if we haven't got evidence for a figure that you might come up with, then the plan is unsound and we can't take that plan forward. So we're doing some work with MHCLG already. So we've got a meeting with them to discuss our concerns around how we can take forward Gypsy and Traveller policies based on how other authorities are dealing with it. If we just come up with a random figure that we think is acceptable, the plan will be found unsound and we will not have a local plan, and the plan will be withdrawn again. So it's the Gypsy and Traveller and the housing numbers in general, not just the housing numbers in general, we have to have clear evidence to show how we're going to reach those and how we've come up with those numbers. So it's not an option anymore to make decisions based on that. Those figures will be based on evidence that we'll have, and that evidence we put through the draft local plan at Regulation 18 stage, and you can then rigorously review it at that point. But the reason we can't put it in this is because we've got to do a few more stages of talking to MHCLG to make sure we've got that figure right.
Okay, so yeah, just a second, if I could just make a comment first, Councillor Simon, thanks. So if I'm understanding correctly, that the same thing applies to both the overall housing numbers, the numbers of, therefore, and within that the numbers that we need to build on Greenbelt is stipulated to us, basically. Okay. Councillor Sargent.
Well, with it's all to do with housing need. You know, I've been around, being the one of the members on the Dale Farm site. We are totally aware of, you know, the figures and how they were produced on that. And that wasn't finger in the air, that really was on the need and the pitches and the growth of those sites, etc. And that's where my rationale was trying to come from, was how are we getting to a figure, and yet you're saying we're agreeing with other areas. Well, and particularly the Essex areas, no doubt, but I mean, we at Basildon may have the highest, or we did once upon a time have the highest figure, and so therefore we would be looking at our own needs and not those of other areas with very low figures.
So, in terms of Gypsy and Traveller figures, that there is a methodology to work out your overall need, or your current need, your current numbers. There's a way of working it out, and then there's a way of work. There is a separate algorithm, a way of working out how you look at whether they are. Well, there's a first thing looking at whether they are Gypsy and Travellers in the first place. Because that's our main concern at the moment, Councillor Sargent, is the fact that a number of our Gypsy and Traveller sites no longer have Gypsy and Travellers on them. So we have got to do a piece of work, and that's why we're challenging, because we're trying to unpick the sites where we haven't got Gypsy and Travellers on, because we don't want to count those in, Councillor Sargent. That's our point, is that if we believe the information we've been given so far, the evidence would lead to a huge increase in Gypsy Traveller provision, which we are very clear that is not the process we're looking at. It's dealing with the current need and the growth of that need, and that's what we want to get to. So if you wanted us to put a figure in there, the figure would not be a figure that we would understand as an evidence-led part of the council that we could accept. So we are bringing that figure down, but that's based on a lot of work of my officers out on site, wandering around Gypsy and Traveller sites, talking to people, whether they are Gypsy and Travellers and who they actually are. So there's a lot of work being done on that figure, and it's about actually evidencing that whatever need we do come up with is actual need for our borough, and that's why we're very sorry we haven't got a figure yet for that, because the figure that was going to be put in there we couldn't substantiate as officers.
Okay, I'd like to move on in the interest of time, Councillor Sargent, if you don't mind.
There was the
on
other.
That point.
There was the other.
Just a second, Councillor. So sorry, what did you feel that your second point wasn't answered, Councillor Sargent?
It was just on the green belt figure of nearly 17,000. The rationale on that, please.
I think we've already covered that, to be honest with you. But Christine, could you very briefly
Just
come
quickly,
back on that?
The approach for green belt release is you have to show the fact that we've done the no stone unturned approach. So we have to look at every single site we've got in the urban fabric first. So Liam over there has done an awful lot of work alongside with Lisa, and they've looked at every single bit of land that we own, every single bit of land that is not currently occupied by a building across the whole of the borough. And they've then mapped all that, and we've then looked at all those and worked out whether or not we can build them, or yes or no. So we've looked at every single bit of brownfield land that is available in the borough. We've looked at all planning consents that we've got currently in the borough as well, and they've taken off, and that leaves us with the need to release land to equate to 16,000 new homes.
Okay, Councillor Robbins, before you make your point, could I just say on the subject of the Gypsy and Traveller thing, obviously we don't have numbers against that, and we have already covered that at some length, so if you could keep it to something that's in addition to what we've already discussed, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
And I'll be brief. You say about the number of Gypsy and Traveller pitches, and you're going around checking. What about the ones that spring up over the weekend, have hardcore put down and move in on that very same day? They are springing up at a rate of knots down the 127 at least. Nothing seems to be being done about it. If that's taken into this equation, we need to do something about it. It's ridiculous.
Is that, yeah. Is that something that's pertinent to this
No.
question? Thanks for your point, Councillor Robbins, but it's not something that's specific to this policy, so in the interest of time, I'd like to move on.
I realise that, but I just wanted to make a point.
Thank you. Okay.
Just one point, and it is regarding the provision of gypsies. What you've got is a minimum number. Could you also have a maximum? I know we can't have the figures at the moment, but should there be a minimum and a maximum? Because what happens, we plan for X for gypsies, and we end up with lots of builders and everybody else being gypsies, and that number explodes. So I'd request that in this document it's a minimum and a maximum figure.
Thank you, Christine. Could you help?
So, Tonya, so as I explained to you already, we are looking at every single gypsy traveller site at the moment to make an assessment of whether or not they're gypsy and travellers, and the officers have done a lot of work on that, and so that's the point you're making about random people moving onto sites. We're doing that piece of work now, so we will not be required to find the growth for those sites, and also if they are gypsy and traveller sites, we would need to take further action to either remove them from those sites or actually cease the use of those sites for gypsy and travellers going forward. In terms of sites that are springing up, the officers are aware of every site in the borough, and we regularly fly the borough on a 2-weekly basis to pick up all new development that's occurred in the areas where we know new development occurs. So we are aware of every single development that's occurred. I would say in the last 2 years, we're aware exactly where those developments are.
Thank you for your response. It was just that point of putting a minimum and a maximum in, so that we always know the range. Not giving you the number, it's just saying there should be a range that you've planned for, so that range doesn't go out of your planning.
My first inclination with that is it wouldn't meet the requirement for a local plan policy has to plan positively for growth. So I don't think that would be possible, but we will take it away and discuss it with our KC as to what could be achieved.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for your question. Okay, can we move on to page 22 and policy SG2 now then, please? Any points from the floor on this one? Councillor Sargent.
I'll be brief, Chairman. I'd like to ask why Note Bridge is not mentioned as a separate settlement. And my second question is can Note Bridge be considered as a settlement rather than be treated as part of the Basildon Langdon for the purposes of housing policies? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sargent. Lisa, is that you? No?
So we carried out an update to our settlement hierarchy. Note Bridge has always been classified as part of Basildon Town in the settlement hierarchy. We will be, alongside this consultation, publishing how we've studied that, but generally Note Bridge used the major services of Basildon. It was felt it was very tightly linked still to Basildon. This will form part of the consultation, so there will be the option to provide a consultation response, and that could be an appropriate response in this case. It was felt to be part of the large town.
Okay, any further questions on that one from the floor? No? Okay. Quick one from me. In reading this, if we're comparing this large and medium towns with the serviced villages, the way it reads is that slightly more strict criteria are being applied to service villages and more criteria being stipulated than, say, for a medium town. Could you just briefly cover why that is?
The National Planning Policy Framework requires us to look firstly at the most sustainable locations, which starts with the largest towns which already have the greatest level of services. In our case, the largest being Basildon, but both Billericay and Wickford are considered to be very well serviced towns. There's a brief table set out in our supporting text which looks at the criteria we looked at. and this will be supported by the settlement hierarchy when that's published. So those areas essentially are considered to be the most suitable to take growth, first of all. A serviced village is considered to have some capacity, potentially, to accommodate growth, but it's traditionally considered it should be either infill, in keeping with the village environment, or we make a deliberate decision through the local plan by allocating land to let it grow.
Sorry to interrupt in full flow, Lisa, but just to be specific, my question really was, if we're talking about infill in Craze Hill, say, as opposed to infill in Wickford, the suggestion from this document is that it's important that it's in keeping with the local character in Craze Hill, but not in Wickford, and I just wondered why that was.
So infilling is in a village environment is something that happens while development is still in the greenbelt. It doesn't involve greenbelt release. So it has a specific section of the National Planning Policy Framework which sets out what criteria should be considered, and one of that is it should be keeping in local character. In respect of the towns and the large towns, we will be introducing a design policy and a design guide which will include reflection of the local character. So it will be considered, but it's not considered in the same way.
So it has to be worded that way.
Because Basildon, Billericay and Wickford aren't infilling in the greenbelt environment.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Sargent.
On that policy, Chairman, policy SG3, the plotlands that the officer just referred to from your question.
Just before you move on, Councillor, we're not actually on SG3 yet. Can I just make sure that no one else has got any further points on SG2 before we move on to SG3? Yes, Councillor Robbins.
Where does Langdon Hills come under all this?
Guys?
Langdon Hills has always been classified as part of Basildon Town in the settlement hierarchy.
Part of Basildon Town?
Yes. No, we've only got on there Langdon separately. We can specify Langdon Hills. I think that's fine.
Langdon Hills is a big enough area. It's got 3 councillors. It's one of the biggest wards in the borough.
Yeah, so the settlement hierarchy primarily divides the area up into 3, which is the Basildon New Town, incorporating Langdon, the Langdon and the Pitsea Ends. I will take away, but I'm inclined to think there shouldn't be a problem adding a reference to Langdon Hills there. But in our settlement hierarchy, we identify it as being part of Basildon New Town, essentially. And again, the settlement hierarchy will be published and can be commented on as part of the consultation.
Chair, can I just add to that? We did carry out an updated initial settlement hierarchy paper, which is it's on the website. That was done in April this year, so that underpins this work. Well, it's a 28-page document, so I think perhaps some of the questions that there are may be answered by that as well.
I just think that Langdon Hills is a pretty big ward, and it's not even mentioned on here, and there's others mentioned on here which aren't as big as Langdon Hills, so...
Thank you for that, Councillor Robbins. I think that point's noted. Yep. Anything more on SG2? Can we move on to SG3? Sure.
Shouting her. Am I on? Yeah. My apologies. The housing numbers on Bowers Gifford Limited Infill Development are 35 to 50, and if you look at the amount of land that's within about North Benfleet, you can see we could put nearer 300 houses in that area and still maintain the village environment within North Benfleet. Just wondered why that number was so low, and could that be reconsidered?
Question. Sorry, I'm switching my mic on now. Sorry, which page are you referring to in the document? Okay, sorry, sorry if I'm missing something really obvious. I can't see any numbers on that page.
It's within your plan, so it's actually
Okay, so that's the next item then. Yeah, that comes under SG3. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Any further points on SG2 before we move on from that? Okay. So SG3 on page 25. Yeah, I guess we take that question. Now, could you just very briefly reiterate your point?
Oh God, sorry, I'm so new to this. It's the first time I've been. The numbers are 35 to 50. We've done our own work on this, on a plan that we were doing, starting off with a neighbourhood plan, etc. And we believe that there's more like 300 that we could get. We could then put some structure in to take this village out of third world into current format. And really improve the area. And we'd just like you to consider that, please.
Okay. Do you want to make a very brief comment on that, Lisa?
Okay. As that's notes at the top, it's draft under review. We commissioned a plotland study, but that figure is limited only to considering the possibility of infill in the plotlands. So it doesn't include any more land densification or a broader area. Separately, we'll be looking at whether there's a suitable allocation, which could bring forward a larger number, in which case that number will probably be removed. But as things stand now, if we treated it as stays in Greenbelt and just has the infill development that's suitable in a Greenbelt environment, our study gave us an upper figure of 50.
Could you share that with us? Because we don't recognise those numbers.
It's currently in draft form and we are still under reviewing that, but it will be published and made available in due course.
Thanks for that. Councillor Sargent, you got a point on SG3, yeah?
Yeah, this was actually the policy that I wanted to speak on, and the point that the parish councillor just made on the North Benfleet. Many years ago, when this council started to consider infill within the Green Belt, we brought out a GB, I think it was GB8 policy that was consulted on for Bowers Gifford. And as the councillor said, there were hundreds of people. So realistically, 35 to 50, I understand what the officer means, that within an infill policy, but there are a very high number, and considering that the neighbourhood development order of the Bowers Gifford and North Benfleet, that order, they are going to want considerably more or require more infill or development within their plotlands. So is that a possibility? Because you do go on to say that there could be a figure of 600 and something. Yeah, 66. And what I've said is it possible to deliver up to 663 dwellings? That's when you've done your studies and come up with your figures. Is that a policy? Because that comes from the ground, you know, the grassroots. That's what the people have been asking for years.
Mr. Cho, just before you answer the question, I mean, in terms of the numbers, obviously we don't have the numbers, I think I'm right in saying, for that section.
At the moment, we have a draft capacity, and what's in this box under plotlands is purely infilling, leaving them in the Greenbelt, but just what small capacity we could put in through infilling on these sites. And collectively, all of those together add up to 663. By a larger allocation would be through an allocation which released the site from the Greenbelt and developed it. And it is very likely that an allocation in Bowers Gifford will come forward. But separately, we are working on allocations at the moment. There will be a policy for each allocation, and they will form part of the consultation. Does that answer your question?
I would suggest we leave it there if you don't mind. I feel like, and we are very, very tight on time in this meeting, and I'd rather not discuss more hypothetical points, if you don't mind. Councillor Myers, can I just move to you then? Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. So this is obviously looking at spatial distribution of growth and limited infill. I've sat on planning now for just over a year and a half and understand what infill means. Obviously, I'm a Wickford councillor and aware of the area. Ramsden View Road 25. Okay, I can see and go a bit further down, but I'm trying to put into my head of Newhouse Farm and Carston Road, and where you get the figure of 375 for infill from. Infill is just trying to just little sporadic little developments because Carston Road is just a lane. It's just a lane. I mean, the other developments that can happen either side will be majors. They're not infill in the such. So I just wondered where you get the figure of 375 from those two areas that join on.
Thanks, Councillor Myers. Lisa, would you take that, please?
So that is what's come back to us from the Plotland study. So we're currently still reviewing that, but that was an area that it was felt could take relatively high levels of growth by the consultants who carried out the Plotland study. So we will be able to take that away and give you a little bit more information on it. But it's still very much a draft figure at this time.
I think, actually, looking at page 27, I don't know if I'm missing something or hitting something here, but it does actually stipulate where the 375 comes from. So 15 to 25 is from infill for the area I think you're describing, Councillor Myers, and the rest is housing capacity through Greenbelt release.
There shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be there in this bit. And the Greenbelt release, because obviously we're talking about infill here.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, Christine or Lisa?
I think the SG3 is obviously, because we're doing that, because obviously with the change in the government and the change in the grey belt position, we've had to do some further work looking at the plotland areas. And I think what we've got is a table that has some infill, like Breakegg Hill and Broomhills Chase. And then you've got areas like Crays Hill, Newhouse Farm, where you've got actually a mixture of infill and greenbelt release. And then you've got North Benfleet, where we haven't done the full assessment of the greenbelt release. We just looked at. So I think this is one that Councillor Baker would love, in terms of the fact that it's not very clear. It's trying to do, at the moment it's doing two things, but we haven't made it very clear what two things it's doing. So I think what you've got here is a mixture of infill and a mixture of infill plus some larger greenbelt release that will sort of, as the parish councillor said from North Benfleet and Bowes Gifford, it actually starts to make some sense out of creating larger allocations to come out of the green belt. How they're then delivered, whether that's through an NDO or through another process, that's then down to the relevant areas, how they want to deliver things, and whether that's through developers or whatever. So this is a mixture of that process at the moment, and I think if you look at the table later on, it sort of gives you an idea. The fact that we have done the Newhouse Farm Estate one, it's looking at a degree of infill, and then it's looking at 350 coming forward through a strong greenbelt release. As with Crays Hill's looking at no infill, but then actually looking at a large capacity of delivering 219 through a greenbelt release that will absorb some of those plotland areas into a future greenbelt release.
Thank you, Christine. So could we move on? Are there any further questions on SG3 before we move on to the next section of the policy document? Okay, so could we move on to page 32, I think it is? So the next policy is policy HE1 under conserving and enhancing the historic environment. Any questions or comments from the floor on that policy, HE1? Yeah.
HE2 is the conservation areas, Councillor. HE2 is the one you want, that's the conservation areas. It's HE2, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. HE2, any observations on that one? Councillor Sargent. Yeah, no worries.
On the on the conservation area, Noak Bridge is a conservation area, and the management plan did have some kind of consultation on it last year. But what I'd ask on HE2 is that if the council will develop a policy to enforce against those who are ignoring the conservation area management plan, making a mockery of the conservation status, because we believe that's what's happening. Because with part of the Noak Bridge neighbourhood plan is that we continue to have a managed conservation status, which isn't happening because it's protecting part of the character and uniqueness of that actual area. So it's important that the conservation status is maintained, but as it belongs to the council, will the policy add something along the lines of, I mean, I don't know. I'll leave that open for the officers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks. Just before I pass it over, I'm not sure I understand the question. You're saying there are some people that are not following the designation of Noak Bridge as a conservation area. That was the bit I wasn't quite clear on, Councillor Sargent.
Noak Bridge is designated conservation area, and I'm asking that within the policy that, am I right in saying that, officers, I mean, it is a policy, HE2, it's conservation areas, and I'm asking for the policy to be strengthened or something to happen to the management plan to allow Noak Bridge to be managed and the area maintained to retain its status and its unique character. Does that make it a little bit clearer?
A little bit, yeah, thanks.
Councillor Sargent, it does. We used to be able to use such policies, and I'm not sure whether we can anymore, can we? Because they can't be. We'll have to look at this. I get what you want. You want number 5 to say, if you don't do it, number 6 to say a different one, that basically saying if you don't do this, we'll enforce against you. I think we need to look something at how we can word that. I don't think we can say that now. I think it has to be worded differently. But we will look and see whether we can put in something around compliance with the policy compliance matter. So we'll look at that. I think it has to be worded very carefully because we can't be seen to be. We're not allowed to be negative in policies. They have to be seen to be positively worded. So we can look at that.
Yeah, I think at the planning application stage, there'd still be a requirement for conservation area consents as well, in addition to planning permission for works. So again, that will be assessed through the planning application process. But we will, yeah, I think we will have to go away and have a look at how we can perhaps phrase something just to respond to that point.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, HE3 listed buildings. Any observations on that, Councillor Sargent?
I've just got a question on there, and I hope you're going to understand this, Chairman. Listed buildings, you know, and obviously I'll come to officers for advice as well. If a listed building is in the green belt, and then there's going to be a development within that green belt, and that can that status be removed where that listed building is sat? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does to me. Officers?
Sorry, Councillor. Is that the status of the listed building, or the green belt?
No, the listed status has got to remain, hasn't it? But if the listed building sits within the green belt, and then a development is proposed,
yeah,
and that green belt and the red line is round that area, does that mean that also that comes out of the green belt and is that listed building?
The listed, we probably need to check. The listed building status would be separate. That's a separate issue to that of the green belt. If you have a development that's impacting on the listed building, that's one of the impacts that's assessed in the development management process. And the listed building could well be delisted, by the way. That is possible. and you can have a conservation area status removed as well. So if, for example, wooden sash windows was a key element of a conservation area, and you put UPVC in, you could well get rid of lose the status of listed buildings and conservation areas. That sort of thing can happen, and obviously that's a key issue when a planning officer will be assessing a development surrounding a listed building. But the green belt would be the status of the green belt and the conservation is probably separate issues. I would suggest that one of my colleagues might be able to advise further. But.
So it's not within the yeah, I get it. So if you've got a housing allocation, and the housing allocation would then wash over a listed building, you're technically taking the listed building. If planning permission's granted, well, if that happens, then the green belt boundary is changed, and the allocation obviously then changes the status, and the building no longer is in the green belt. That process. The application might not, though, include the listed building, and this has happened on the Wash Road application. The listed building there isn't part of the application site. The allocation never happened because the allocation's gone, but it's not part of the planning application site. It's taken out of the planning application site. So if that came back as an allocation, the allocation would wash itself over the listed building, and the listed building then would form a new. You would have then a new boundary for the green belt would be created by that allocation. That's happened with a few sites in Billericay where the same's happened there, where in terms of the old plan, the green belt washed over some of those listed buildings. In terms of the allocation washed over some of those listed buildings, and if that local plan had gone through, they would have been taken out of the green belt, because the green belt boundary would have been redrawn, unless we had gone round it. But it's really hard to go round a building if the building sits inside an allocation, because you end up with a bit of green belt that sits actually inside an allocation. So I would say the answer to your question is, if the listed building sits within allocation, then the wash of the green belt will be removed at the point that local plan gets through to adoption. Is that the answer to your question?
I think just very quickly on that, because we've got a similar scenario with Burnt Mills as well, and that's application with the farmhouse being listed there. But the Heritage at Risk Register is maintained by Historic England, so there's not that automatic separation.
And Christine knows the actual house.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, HE4, Scheduled Monuments and Archaeology. Any points on that? No? HE5, Non-Designated Heritage Assets. Any comments or questions? Okay, so moving on then to the third section, Economic Growth and Employment. So our first policy there is E1, Securing Economic Growth. So over to the floor. Any questions or comments on these policies? Councillor Myers.
Just really on the area of point B, make provision of between 55 to 82 hectares. I mean, that's quite a large difference in terms of what the plan is seeking to achieve. Based on that, I mean, obviously there is a very large range here, but I just consider that perhaps what the borough needs for employment land could be perhaps narrowed down slightly more, because that's quite a large difference, 55 to 82 hectares.
Actually, yeah, I mean, just to add on to your question, if I may, I mean, this is a range, obviously, as opposed to a specific figure, so if you could just explain why that is, that would be helpful.
Yep, that's fine. So we've got a draft employment land review, and that works with 4 potential scenarios. There's always that need to maintain housing and employment growth in balance. So I think I would clarify that the 55 to 82 is what the evidence comes back with. But as part of finalising and sense checking the policies, we've got to go back to Litchfield as our consultant because of the standard method revisions and see if they think those figures remain accurate. The thing is, of course, there's got to be that balance to protect against excessive in-commuting and out-commuting. So whether they still recommend the same scenario or not in light of the higher housing target is something we need to look at, because the current assumptions that they've used involve baselining labour supply forecasts, and they were assessed against the old standard method. So you're right, but the range there is about the scenario. We did have a range of, I think, 78 to 92 for the previous the withdrawn plan of a couple of years ago, but they proposed another figure which is higher if we look to address some of what they consider was demand that had gone unmet, and so there's a bit more work to do just to nail that down, but we take the point on board.
Councillor Myers, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just to be clear, so these figures need to be revised based on the new standard methodology that's been brought in.
Yes, we need to go back to the consultant and check if they think that's still accurate. Yes.
There is a larger figure mentioned somewhere else in the document, isn't there? 197 hectares, is it?
Yes, they suggest up to 197. It's a little bit vague, to say the least, but that's that would be if the council chose to address what they consider as historic unmet market demand, based on some analysis they've carried out within the study. Again, the study is in draft. We've been through it, so we're looking to get that finalised with them. Again, that will be ready for the consultation later in the year.
Great, thank you. Any further comments from the members on E1?
I have one, if I can possibly head off a question.
Sure.
Within the supporting text for that, the 12 employment areas that are listed, there's a rather embarrassing error there. Ford Dunton was missed out, so that will be added and it will be changed to 13, but we may move that list into the policy.
Yeah, you beat me to it on that one though as well. I was just about to make that point. Thank you. Can I just make a couple of points actually on item C in this list? So ensuring all existing and new employment land provision is accessed by frequent and high quality sustainable active modes, linking to existing and new residential areas with job opportunities in the borough. I mean, when I read this, and this maybe I think comes back to a point that Councillor Myers made at the start, is great idea in principle, but how realistic is this? In terms of, for example, a new housing development on the edge of Billericay or Wickford, feeding into a new employment area in Basildon with fairly restricted existing transport links between the two. And again, too much information here, but I live half a mile from Billericay High Street and my neighbours drive to Waitrose. So that kind of dimensionalises the issue a little bit. Any kind of sage observations on that?
Obviously we can't plan for every area to be as well connected to every other area, but one of the things we will be doing as part of this is some updated transport modelling, which will look at where movement is predicted to happen. But in order to do that, we need to have both a spatial strategy that we've agreed, so where are we putting the housing and where are we putting the employment. So that will be post this Regulation 18 consultation. Alongside that, we have also done a lot of work on a local walking and cycling infrastructure plan, so to try and give as many modes of access to different sites. And we are also looking at options for sustainable transport. So supporting the whole local plan will be an infrastructure delivery plan which will set out how allocations, both housing and employment, will be required to contribute towards public transport and to improving the infrastructure for walking, cycling, other modes of active travel.
I think just to add
so,
as well.
so in short, we're happy with the words and we're going to deliver on it. Lisa, is that what you're saying?
We are going to do our best to deliver on that.
Thank you. Robert, I think you had a point to come in there.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Baker. Yeah, just to add to that, I suppose that the council's corporate objectives are around upskilling residents. We've got a draft policy again around aligning skills and jobs to that extent. Following national policy, of course, we are also required to promote sustainable transport access over private car use. So we're just trying to cover those eventualities really through it. Obviously, if there is a view that the wording can be improved, then obviously we're happy to listen to any suggestions on that.
Yeah, I mean, if we believe it's deliverable, I'm fine with the wording. I think, thank you. It was just a point that occurred to me. On item E, just very briefly, I found the wording here a little bit unclear. So it talked about making the best use of brownfield sites without causing harm to the green belt, which I would thought was one and the same thing, unless I'm misreading it.
Yeah. We can certainly reword that. I think I would agree. It does actually look a little bit clumsy.
Thank you. Sorry. E2. Any questions or comments from the members on that one? No? Okay. E3. Changes of use of employment land or premises. Yes, sure. E2. Back to E2. Yeah, Councillor Mars.
Sorry, yes. Just on this, I know it's quite a small policy here, but obviously with some of the sui generis kind of uses that we have across the borough, just wondered whether or not, when you've got large industrial areas that are currently doing in Wickford, in Basildon, Billericay, Radford Park, etc. Obviously agree sort of Class E, B2 and B8 uses, etc., etc. But some of the sui generis stuff in this policy and particular plan, I mean, are we just going to say, oh, you can open a pub on an industrial estate, for example, and change the use? I mean, because sometimes, you know, you say business use, etc. I'm just wondering how we can sort of change some of the sui generis employment natures that we have, because obviously you have cafes there and things like that. So I just wondered if we could knuckle down on what would be acceptable on industrial sites in employment areas.
Who could comment on that, Christine?
Robert.
Robert?
Yeah, I think I take the point. I suppose answering a question with a question, how likely do you think it would be that a pub would open in an industrial estate? Again, I think it's fine. We can look at that. But within the wording itself, we do refer to a similar employment nature. When you're dealing with, I suppose, developments where you've got logistics premises, warehousing, you would typically, industries do tend to cluster together. But again, in the event that an application came in for something that we may think is not perhaps the best use of premises in that space, then it will be subject to a planning application and scrutiny through the application process by a case officer.
The amendments to the Class E, I think E little g is actually the old B1 use anyway, isn't it? So it's basically not an open, we're not giving an open E class use, you're actually specifically looking at a specific part of that. So what we're saying, what that's basically saying is the fact that retain E little g, which is B1, B2, which is B8, and other sui generis uses. I don't like sui generis uses because they are specific. Once you have a sui generis use, you can't change it to anything else. You have to have planning permission. So it's not a use that you can flip around anyway. It would automatically require planning permission to change it to something else. So that's a bit of a control there.
Okay, thank you. So have we covered E3? No, I think we have, haven't we? So E4, rural enterprise sites. Any questions or comments on that one?
Can I just raise it?
Sure.
There's only one question I wanted to ask you, Councillor Sargent, as you're here. If you look at, we've got Barleylands Depot. Do you think we should have added Barleylands Farm to that? An open question.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I had it on another policy, which would have been wrong, but it really does need to put things like the development of you know, the agricultural land, because it's just so sad that Barleylands Farm has developed so much piecemeal over the years that the local residents haven't got absolutely any Section 106 money at all from that. So it would be nice if that was put under there, so they can all be dealt with fairly and squarely. Thank you.
Given the range of uses there are there, actually, you'll be happy to know we've picked that up as a change already. So we're going to add that.
What we need to be careful of, I think what Councillor Sargent is saying, we need to be careful of the new red line around that business area, because we need to keep it. We need to talk to Barleylands about that, because what we are not having isn't the whole area, because we don't take that whole area out of the greenbelt. It's basically trying to keep it quite tight around the existing employment area they've created, rather than allow any, give them rather than. So that's a point we just need to look at the red line around that new employment area, or the bound.
Okay. Anyone else?
Here, Councillor Sargent.
Can I raise a couple of points actually on E4? So on point, well, I think this applies to the whole thing really, but when I read this, it reads to me as, obviously I know we're in the section of rural, but the descriptions didn't necessarily align with the locations as far as I was reading it. For what an example of what I mean is, we've got Barleylands Depot listed under support rural economy and provide greater flexibility to the existing rural sites, etc., etc. I mean, Barleylands Depot is there for a particular reason, isn't it? But it's hardly part of the rural economy in that sense. Are we happy that this wording is appropriate for our version of the rural economy here in Basildon, I think is my question.
I suppose under the new grey belt position we've now got with the new government, all these sites technically would fit that definition of grey belt now, because obviously they sit within the green belt, but they're all pre-developed land. So I suppose the argument is the fact that Barleylands Depot, I'm not sure how that came about, how it was located there. There might have been a original farm there and it took over part of that. I'm not sure. So I think all of these would have developed from some form of previous development in the green belt, and then obviously it's grown over time. So I'm not sure the historic starting of Barleylands Depot, but as far as we're concerned, it sits in the green belt. It's in the rural area. It is we would seek to retain it as a current employment base. Whether or not in the future that changes to anything else, that would be subject to planning permission. So we'd seek to retain it in the green belt. So yeah, I suppose it's not a quaint diversified farm, but I don't think any of our farms we've got, even the ones that have like Anwood Lodge was originally a farm, wasn't it?
I think that's my point exactly, Christine. Really, I'm now struggling to find some wording to understand to kind of underpin what I'm saying, but it kind of reads in terms of a rural community of you have these facilities, you have people that live close to them that are not within sufficient distance of a town to work in a town. Therefore, there has to be rural employment for them. But that's certainly not the case for Barleylands Depot, and I think it's potentially not applicable to some of the others as well. So sorry, I'm waffling a bit now. Aren't I?
We'll have a look at that. I think what it's about the rural. It's not about really. It's about anyway. We can look at how that meets the test for rural enterprise sites. We can look at that, can't we? We'll take that away and we'll review that.
Thank you. Okay, are we on E5? Do we have E5? Because I might think, unless I'm missing something, I'm going straight from E4 to E6. Is that right?
So the heavy industry policy is being reworked. It's the initial draft that was in there was the same as in the revised publication plan that was withdrawn. But I think it was at that time referred to as untidy industry. But again, in light of grey belt changes, we're going to go away and just rework it.
Thank you.
So again, there'll be an opportunity.
Thank you, Robert. So E6, any... Oh, sorry, Councillor Miles, over to you.
Sorry, could you just clarify what E5 covers, please, just so I can just make a note?
So that referred to the area around Archersfield, typically the polluting industries around there. The thrust of that policy, it takes its cue from NPPF Chapter 15, which is again around pollution and ensuring that land and sites are suitable for the intended use. So it was the general direction of that previous policy was about containing those industries within that location.
So a lot of it's to do with VCC as well.
Thank you. E6, any observations on that one? No?
There'll be one change to the policy as well, where it says applicants will be encouraged in the draft. We're going to change that to applicants will be required.
Okay. Okay, so I think we're now moving on to improving air quality and mitigating pollution. So we have policy AQMP1 on page 48. Would anybody like to raise a question or a comment on that one? No. Okay. Oh, sorry, go on, Councillor Myers.
Thank you. So just, I thought we'd lock myself off in. Generally, it reads fairly okay, but obviously there are still concerns of the government notice on the A127 still in place at the moment, and obviously when all of this comes to fruition, do we know? I mean, in this policy, I don't currently read anything other than saying trying to mitigate noise, dust, pollutants, etc. But we're still under that ministerial directive. So I just wondered whether this could take into account that when assessing any plans that come forward.
Do you want to take that, Lisa?
Yeah, we have had some discussion internally with our environmental health team, and they have asked us to look at the possibility of tightening this one a little bit in the event that an air quality management area is declared in the future. We have taken that away. We've had a brief discussion with our KC, and we need to look a bit further on what best practice is, but we'll address that in the final version.
Thanks, Lisa. Just very brief one from me here. I guess this is just the wording that we use in these documents, but the key bit of this seems to be significant adverse effects. I'm going back to my comments about being specific and measurable. How do we regulate that? Guys, could you just give me a brief answer on that? I mean, how do we decide what significant is, in other words?
Oops. That's the test from the NPPF.
Right.
So we have to look at significant adverse effects or adverse impacts. It's either way. And then from that, you then weight it based on air quality, noise, light pollution. So it's a weight against. So the significant impacts or effects are based on the outcomes of all this. So you'd weigh it all up together, and then you'd work out, Councillor Myers was part of the Lower Dunton Road application, where obviously we were weighing up there the difference between the air quality and the noise impacts of the development there, and then you were very carefully looking at the noise impacts of A127 and also and the air pollution context of the A127, based on whether or not those impacts were great enough to refuse planning permission, and that was the weight that was put on that. So it is and then what you have to do is make sure those levels, so you test all those levels, are acceptable in terms of meeting the requirements of the scientists to ensure that there's no harm to human health if people move in there.
So there's some actual numbers behind
Yeah.
what significant means.
Yeah.
Thank you. That answers my question. That's great. Thanks, Kristen. Okay. AQMP2, contaminated land. Any questions on that? I mean, my only one here was one of these sentences ends in a question mark. I assume it shouldn't, but I guess that will be changed. So AQMP3, any questions from the members on that one?
Can I just put that 1 second?
Yeah, of course.
My only question that Alicia and I discussed this with Councillor Baker is the fact that we just need to understand the Building Safety Act, the tall buildings. So we just need to make sure that we get that into whether or not we need to put it in here or whether we actually need to deal with it anywhere in our future policies. That's tall buildings, building over 18 metres, 7 stories. So we'll just make sure that whether we need a policy on that or not, whether it's covered under building regulations.
So on AQMP3, just again brief comment from me. Obviously, this is ensuring that health and safety is taken into account in development. Obviously, is an absolutely critical point. And there's quite a bit less detail in this policy than there is, for example, in AQMP1. Should I be concerned, or should we be concerned about that?
I mean, like the Building Safety Act, as planners, we don't, when the developments come in, they have to be sent straight to, well, part of the HSC, it's actually the HSC, and they assess it. We are what's called Gateway 1. If the HSC say they will not pass it, the development does not get planning permission. No. So it is, where HSC are involved, they are the stop. So like with tall buildings, we can't grant planning permission for a tall building if it hasn't got through Gateway 1. So I think it is saying the fact that if developments are not acceptable under HSC, we can't grant planning permission for them. So I think we need to be careful of that policy, because that one might not. I think can we just look at that, because I think under Gateway 1, especially with tall buildings, it falls away from us anyway. So I think we just need is it a policy or just a statement? Let's just double check that.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Mars.
Yeah, and so just not just with tall buildings, but obviously it's I know necessarily this is a planning point, but the regulation, I know it already exists under building control, but obviously in the policy, whether or not something can be put in that guarantees that workplace safety will be adhered to at all times, to make sure that the developers who come in, yes, get licensed by HSE to say that their building methods are correct, but whether or not their day-to-day operations are running as smoothly as, I know that's a building control thing, but is that something we can include in this policy to mandate that they do that?
We actually can't enforce it, so it would be a statement, not a policy, so we can't do that. So it would be like using an informative on a planning application, which technically we can't enforce, and we're not allowed to have policies that are statements, because there's development management officers can't use that in decision making. So it's that difference, isn't it, between a statement and a policy, and also is it just replicating something that already exists? We can't do that either. So it's that balance between. It is quite hard with things like HSC, air quality, building regulations, because there's things we are involved with now which they keep giving us more and more, then they took more offers. But then if we, like Gateway 1 we can't control, because if it stops at Gateway 1, it stops at Gateway 1, we can't approve it. So actually we can't even say all applications have to reach Gateway 1 sometimes, because if they don't, then planning permission is not granted. So it's a bit of a where the regulations sit already. Yeah. So we have to be careful, but we will look at that policy to make sure that it meets. We push it as far as we can push it.
Thanks, Christine. So AQMP4, development of agricultural land. Anything on that one, guys? No. So just something from me here again around a similar sort of thing to my comment on the rural thing. Really is, to what degree is this the appropriate wording for this borough? So we talk about the best and most versatile agricultural land, and we also mentioned a little bit about grade 3. So to what extent do we have the best and most versatile agricultural land in the borough? Therefore, to what extent is that applicable to us?
In the supporting document that we've got with the agricultural land sort of report, that has a breakdown map of what we've got in terms of grade 3 and grade 4. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but it's the majority, I believe, is grade 3 with, I think, grade 4 in the north. But there will be further information that can be referred to. Some other local authorities do put the map in their plan, so it's something we could look at if it is felt to be beneficial.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. That's helpful. It was just the very first sentence of this is development of the best and most versatile agricultural land should be avoided, and I'm kind of inferring slightly from your comment that we haven't got a lot of the best and most versatile agricultural land. So should we be leading with that if it's not the most applicable point in the borough? I think is my point really.
I suppose you could just go with.
Sorry, Councillor, would you just mind if I just get an answer to that before I come to you? Thank you.
I think basically that you could just go with the second bit, couldn't you? Because all you need to say is development proposed on agricultural land classified as grade 3 will be required. I mean, we can look at that policy because I think you're quite right. You're saying, and what we're saying is we haven't got the best and most versatile is grades 1, 2, and 3A, isn't it? And we're mainly 3B and 4. So actually, we haven't got the best and most versatile because we've got basically quite poor agricultural land.
Yeah, I think the first part of the wording for that as well tried to pick up on another reform that was proposed 12, 18 months ago by the previous government in one of their consultations where they were looking at attributing more weight to the food growing angle of agricultural land and to help to protect against the loss of land to environmental projects. Obviously a number of farmers are struggling now, so I think that's perhaps where we are with that, but again things have moved on, so yeah, we're happy to take it away and look at the wording there.
Thanks, Robert. Sorry, Councillor Robbins, do come in.
Have you forgotten the amount of farmland that's up in Langdon Hills? You've got Dry Straits Farm, which is acres and acres. They grow wheat, barley, hay, all over the back of that hill. It's cereal crops.
Steph, would you mind coming back on that one? Sorry, Lisa, for you. I guess the question is, does that the land that Councillor Robbins is describing fall under category 1, 2, or 3A? Is that kind of the point?
Yeah, if I take that one, the categories are defined by Natural England, and they publish a map showing the areas. From memory, most of Langdon Hills is classified as 3. As 3, yeah. So it's not considered to be the best, most versatile, which is grades 1 and 2. So it only has limited capacity and limited yield. But we will add the map to this consultation so it's clearer how the land is classified.
We would still want to ensure that we keep the best that we can.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think that's that section complete unless anyone else has got any further comments. Can I suggest we take a 10-minute break at this stage? So if we could reconvene, actually let's make it a 7-minute break. If we could reconvene at 9 o'clock. Guys, that would be appreciated. Thanks for your contributions so far. Okay, guys, so we're back live on the web streaming. So I think we're now on page 56, policy INF1, infrastructure delivery. Anyone want to come in on that one? Yes, Councillor Sargent? Were you raising your hand? Go.
Sorry, Chairman, I was trying to get the policy and it came to, no, it's on that one. This is so important, this policy, because without the necessary infrastructure, nothing holds up, does it? And the question I'm just saying on this, will this policy be effective enough to support, you know, all of our developments that we propose? Because I know you can't guarantee absolutely anything, but I think have we still got, or are we still looking towards an infrastructure first? Because it really is so important. Because we kind of let the planning, we put the planning applications through, and when it comes to infrastructure, the Section 106s may not get finished or started, and or we might not get the infrastructure. So, and also about the negotiations with the authorities, Christine. You know, with it, or not our own, the other authorities. Are they tough enough to get the requirements that we need?
Just before you answer it, Christine, can I add to that actually, which is the middle sentence in this policy suggests it's a bit of a negotiation, the infrastructure requirement between the developer and the council, and I'm wondering whether that's entirely appropriate.
So there's two strands to this, and actually the meeting we had a meeting with our critical friend who is KC helping us through the plan process at the moment. We met with him today, and the policy needs to be changed and will be reworded, because he's clear that because we're looking at large allocations, and the allocations will be large, there needs to be a lot more detail in here around phasing and evidence-led. So again, the criticism we're getting about lack of infrastructure is the fact that nothing actually has been built yet. So the lack of infrastructure historically, there only has been one large scheme approved in the more recent history, and that was the Dry Street scheme, the Red Row Home scheme. And actually, if you look at that scheme, okay, it didn't deliver much affordable housing, but in terms of delivering a school and everything else that's gone alongside it, it actually has delivered a lot of infrastructure. The schemes that have gone through on appeal and have been won, those schemes are just starting to get to the stage where they're about to come out of the ground. And attached to all those are very stringent 106 agreements. And developers, to get out of a 106 agreement, have to do an awful lot of work to not pay a contribution. And we haven't had any developers so far tell us they're not paying contributions. So they will all pay in terms of what has to be delivered. So the work that the team are doing on the infrastructure delivery plan is what feeds this policy. And that basically will be for every allocation that comes forward. There'll be a requirement for whether it needs schools, whether it needs transport, whether it needs new road junctions, and all that will be costed. And every allocation then, you then look at the viability, whether the scheme can come forward based on all that information. So this policy is in its, probably I'd say, you probably agree, in its infancy, and it actually will be more robust when it comes to the final position. So what we'll take from you, Councillor Sargent, is the fact that you and Councillor Baker, is that you're questioning the robustness of the policy, and what we would come back to you and say is we know it needs to be more robust, and Council this morning had that conversation with us about the robustness of this policy. So it will be changing to ensure that it meets the infrastructure needs of developments. Infrastructure first is not. You're never going to get a developer or the education authority that require you to build the school at the beginning of a development. They never ever do that. There's not a school that has come forward first on any development. If you build a school, it does not deal with the children who come from that development. parents love new shiny schools. All that school will be filled up with is parents who don't want their kids to go to the old school down the road. They want the new school. So when that new school, when the kids from that new scheme come forward and need school places, they'll have to go to different schools somewhere else. So that's why schools normally come on quite late in the development process, normally about halfway through, because of the fact that they're there to deal with the needs of the development, not the needs of the school. Now, on local plan allocations, we can look at the wider need of school places, and that's why we might have, and that's what that's Note Bridge, isn't it? There was that whole argument: don't we need a school on the site? Does it meet the school? Can the school deal with it? So there's a lot more around that policy than just what's written there, and the policy needs to be more robust. And we've taken that on board from the conversations with Council this morning.
Councillor Mice, did you have a point to come in on?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Lyons, for bringing us up to date with the conversation with the KC, because I do, reading this policy, it's very thin on the ground in terms of what's I believe is needed to shore up our position. Infrastructure, of course, is the largest problem that a lot of ward councillors have when discussing housing allocations and schemes that potentially go towards planning, or when are they going to build a school, doctors, etc. Road transport links, new roads, bypasses, etc., etc. So I think it does need shoring up and a lot more robustness needed. Just generally on the infrastructure side of things, it's not necessarily this policy, but the whole infrastructure side of things. I just wanted to know, Christine, but with this plan, would we then become seal compliant?
So there's two. So I think what you're asking is, will we become a seal-bearing authority? So as part of the work at the moment, we're looking at seal, and we're looking at, I mean, the reason why we'd initially stopped work on seal is that obviously the new the previous government brought forward the new the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and then the LURA, the Act that followed it, and part of that was that set to review the whole process of securing obligations, and it was going to remove the Section 106 provision, and it was going to remove SIL and bring in a new infrastructure levy. That obviously has been now taken over by the new government, so we have started again looking at SIL. We would try and adopt SIL in advance of the local plan, but that's quite difficult because we haven't got a plan to measure the infrastructure requirements against to work out how much the SIL should be. But we are running SIL alongside our local plan preparations. That's more important because if you're dealing with the urban, if we're going to deal with all those sites coming in the urban area, any site less than 10 units, we cannot seek planning obligations for. So we need to be seeking planning obligations of sites of. So basically, if you take one dwelling out and you put two in, you require to pay SIL payments on the second dwelling. So once you get plus one, then you require to pay SIL. And what that does, that makes up the SIL deficit in a lot of the areas where we've got infrastructure deficit. So that will help us. And a lot of that money can go for local activity. So the work that the current administration have done on the new area committees, it will give the ability for the area committees to be given money to improve their areas. Parish councils, as you're aware, Council Sergeant, you get 15% straight away of SIL. If you've got a neighbourhood plan, Council Sergeant, you get another 15%. So, but then you have to have the development, which is the swings and roundabouts a bit. So, but yeah, we're definitely working on SIL, and that will come alongside the emerging local plan.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, Councillor Miles.
No, thank you for that, Christine. Just so people here aren't aware what SIL means, it's community infrastructure levy, isn't it? So it's pretty much a set payment per dwelling that is built, rather than Section 106 contributions, which are decided by other outside authorities and Basildon Council's internal authorities in terms of how much money they would need to, say, secure school places or what they needed in parks and open spaces. So it's just a flat levy on any new building. And obviously Chelmsford, of course, has SIL, I believe, So when they've done Beauty Park, they're getting a tremendous amount of money coming in from that side of things to redo. So I think it is very important that we do continue to look at this option, because I think it would help the borough in the future as well if we can be still compliant.
But Councillor Myers, you need development to go alongside it. And that's what Chelmsford have done, haven't they? They've delivered an awful lot of houses, and that's why they've got a large sill receipt, because they've delivered. But you can so you are now allowed to run along sill alongside 106 as well. So it's not saying before you could only have one or the other. Now you can use 106 agreements as well for other infrastructure.
Thank you. Okay, INF2 then, securing infrastructure contributions. Have we covered that off? Has anyone got anything else to add on that one? And just one comment from me on this. I just want to make sure we're happy with the wording of, I was looking at paragraph 4, so the ones that starts planning permission. I just see a slight contradiction between this and, for example, our desire to push development towards town centres. In the sense of, I can imagine the scenario where we build some new houses on the edge of one of our towns. We expect people to migrate from those houses into the centre of the town, in line with that policy, kind of through the eye of a very busy needle that we already have. Is there anything we can do to amend the wording on that, or or to kind of ease that slight contradiction? Have I explained myself clearly? I feel like I'm rambling.
If I can clarify, so you're referring to the one that starts, planning permission will only be granted if it can be demonstrated that there is or will be sufficient infrastructure capacity to support and meet all necessary requirements.
Yeah, it kind of, I see a slight contradiction between that and the town centre policy. Sorry, my fault, Lisa. I think it was mine. In terms of, we say, okay, yes, we've got the development, we've got the infrastructure in the town centre, but actually we've created a serious traffic issue, trying to get in very confined situation between the housing and the infrastructure.
So thank you for that clarification. I think I understand the question. So we will be commissioning additional evidence, including the infrastructure delivery plan. As part of that, we will be considering commissioning a study of the cumulative impact of all the development that we're looking at, which will include development in the town centres. That will be something that we do early in 2025, because we need to have completed this consultation, and again we need to know what we're putting where. As part of that, they'll identify whether the infrastructure is there in its current form is sufficient to support the growth, whether we need to do further improvements or additional infrastructure in the areas, including in the town centres. Obviously, a town centre, we've got more limitations because we've got to work with the existing built form. So we also look at mode shift and transport in particular. We look at mode shift towards sustainable travel and what role that can apply. And that's one of the major thinkings behind developments in the town centre, close to where there are transport hubs. So there are railway stations, there are large busy bus stations going out to multiple routes, and there's reasonable travel for active travel. That will be factored in, and the infrastructure plan will set out whether those developments are expected to contribute towards improvements as well as new infrastructure. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it does. I have a slight concern that we might get in a situation where we can't put infrastructure improvements in place because of the physical constraints we're dealing with. But yeah, that does partially answer the question, Lisa. Thank you. Okay, INF3, social and community infrastructure. Any thoughts on that? No? Okay. So we're now moving on to the next section. So policy R1. supporting town centres. Anybody like to make a contribution on that? Yes, Christine.
Sorry, following the conversation we had this morning, and I think following the conversation we had with you and Lisa and myself the day, there is a new policy is going to be created, if I'm not wrong, and that's around a separate policy dealing with Basildon town centre itself and a regen policy. So R1 might become a little bit more, that was following the advice from Council this morning, so our conversation, so R1 will might be changing slightly to ensure we have a separate policy that allows us to look specifically at the regen status of the Basildon town centre.
Thanks, Christine. Can you give us an indication of how it might change, because that might help us frame more questions?
I think what it might take out is references to Basildon town centre itself, and this might deal with the sort of the other town centres directly. So you'll end up with, but we haven't. I mean, that was a conversation we had with council this morning, wasn't it? So we haven't even had time to think about how we're going to what we're going to do with it. So, but it's something that you raised as well. I think you raised the fact that you didn't think it went far enough to deal with Basildon town centre itself. Mm-hmm. So I think, so yeah, so that I think that's where we are.
Okay. No further questions on that from the guys. No. Okay. Fine. Okay. So I think in that one we mentioned Laned in a list in paragraph 2, but then it's turned into a TBC when we get further down. So I assume that will be addressed in the revised wording, will it, Christine?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. Okay. Just for my benefit, could you just explain what's meant by other town centre uses? You know, a typical example of what that might mean. So the last paragraph in that policy.
Yeah, so the NPPF glossary defines a list of acceptable main town centre uses, and that really, because we're talking primarily about retail here, obviously office uses, leisure uses, housing are all acceptable there. What we mean in this particular section, and by applying that sequential approach to the consideration of applications, it takes account of the hierarchy of centres that we've got. So we are looking at concentrating the bulk of main town centre development within Basildon town centre, and then there'd be a lower level of growth in Billericay, Wickford and Pitsea. Ostensibly, it follows the national policy line. Sites within the heart of a town centre will be preferable. Then edge of centre locations, outer centre, only if there are no other suitable sites available, and then we will utilise the requirements for the sequential and retail impact assessments. Sequential testing is just again around why a developer's chosen that particular site as opposed to other options if there are premises available. So that's part of the planning application process. But it's about ensuring that we are driving growth to the right location.
Thank you. Okay, R2 primary shopping areas. Any input on that one? Okay. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Marsh, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just based on those primary shopping areas, not just in Basildon town centre, but of course in the other town centres, there's not a lot of land that the council has sort of any particular control over in those other areas. Obviously, just a bit concerned for primary shopping areas. I mean, how would you in this policy say to prioritise particular areas in high streets that are used only for shopping and retail rather than for residential? I think there's issues with sort of ground floor and above being turned into sort of flats in Billericay, and there has been some proposals for Wickford as well. Just wondered how this policy will go to actually support those areas where the council does not actually have any particular control over, and obviously with sort of change of use, etc. With the MPPF changing into Class C for residential, how much scope would this policy actually have to prevent and actually preserve and protect what are the primary shopping areas in those locations?
Okay, Robert.
Yeah. So what we're setting out here is that the main primary shopping area should be the focus for those main uses, and again other Class C uses, and then setting criteria. I think again, when a planning application is received, of course there'll be more than one policy that's applicable. So R1, for example, would also be used to assess the suitability of any such proposal. Obviously, we are, and developers would also be mindful in their supporting evidence of the turbulence there is on the high street, the competition from online shopping. Again, a local plan has to be looked at as a whole, similar to national policy. There'll be the requirement of things like public realm improvements as well. We want town centres to be attractive. So this is about trying to ensure that we've got active frontages at ground floor level, for example, is a criteria. We'd want to ensure that there's any uses there generate activity and footfall, and that there's a positive contribution made through any proposals. If that answers your question.
It does, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I don't know if this is covered by the previous answer in terms of the rewording, Christine, but paragraph 3 in R2, we talk about maintaining the position of Basildon Town Centre at the top of the retail hierarchy. I mean, given the current status, is that realistic wording?
I mean, it is in terms of our borough, it is the highest serviced town centre, so it will always remain that. I think the discussion we had today was actually where it sits sub-regionally, isn't it? And that's the issue, isn't it? I think it still has a function as a sub-regional shopping centre, and it's how do we maintain that position. I think it's important. So the policy is about maintaining and improving the town centre, and I think that regen policy will be quite a good policy to put in place.
Yeah, I think there's not really too much to clarify to that, but it just heightens the need for that separate bespoke policy that just highlights the administration's aims and objectives.
Yeah, I understand it's absolutely critical that we regenerate Basildon Town Centre, and there's plenty of scope to do that. It's more, the wording suggests a certain position literally in the hierarchy that, potentially at the moment may not be, depending on how you're judging it, of course, may not be.
So within the initial settlement hierarchy work, we did a little bit of work on again establishing a town centre hierarchy as well, and in terms of assessing where obviously within policy R1 that hierarchy is replicated, but how we go around establishing that is really looking at assessing the town centres by the range, the numbers of retail units, the amount of floor space there, the range of services and amenities that are accessible, and clearly in Basildon, the town centre is larger than the other principal centres in the borough.
Okay, so just in terms of its current status, it justifies that wording as far as you're concerned.
That's
Even though we obviously
are
are desirous to make it much more than it is now.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
That's in spite of the high vacancy rates as well. But again, the number of retail premises in the first instance is a lot larger than is found in the other principal town centres in the borough.
Thank you. Okay, R3. Anyone want to come in on that one? No? Okay. I mean, just from me, we mentioned kind of halfway down this policy an impact assessment, which I couldn't see any reference to in the earlier wording. So is the flow of the wording correct there, given that in paragraph 4, unless I'm missing something, we suddenly raise impact assessments that don't seem to be referenced previously?
I think with moving text around, there's something that's been deleted from there. So that's fine. I'll double check that. We can put that back in.
That's fine. Okay. Councillor Myers, yeah. Over to you.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Obviously, this, I wouldn't say particularly new, but obviously existing areas of Pips Hill, Burnt Mills, large retail shopping zones, Mayflower, etc. Where we're seeing large retailers conglomerating into retail parks is generally where they go rather than into town centres. So I just wondered whether paragraph 1 actually, where it says retail and leisure uses should be predominantly located within designated town centres. I'm a bit concerned about that sentence because the majority of people who will go shopping, will go to supermarkets, etc., will go to major retail parks as they do now. So I'm just concerned about whether or not that particular line on this policy for location for new retail and leisure development is actually applicable for that first sentence because we're discussing outside of town centres.
I think I'd just clarifying that we are looking at locations for retail and leisure development outside of town centres here. This very first sentence here sets out the expectation that we do expect the bulk of any proposals to go within the town centres. The reason why we have this as well, it's just worth clarifying that national policy does not consider that retail parks, albeit that they do make a very valued contribution to the retail offer of Basildon and most of the towns and cities in the country, they aren't considered to be part of the retail hierarchy or a town centre hierarchy. And again, they have grown in popularity due to attractions such as free parking, as you correctly identify. In this borough in particular, it's a challenge because a number of the main, the larger units are in Pips Hill, and typically Pips Hill, Mayflower, they contain a number of, if you like, the better known retailers that you would typically find in a high street. So what we're aiming to set out within this this policy here is to ensure that we are respecting our town centres. We're not looking to undermine what will be R1, R2 and the new Basildon policy when we draft that. We do set out that where there's demand from commercial leisure operators for premises, we'd want them to go to the town centre first. They'd have to follow the sequential approach. Also, just to clarify as well, the reference to the impact assessments, we'll tighten up the wording, but in paragraph 4, that refers to the last paragraph of supporting text and the reference to our retail and leisure needs study, because that recommended that the impact threshold at which point we'd expect retail impact assessments to be carried out would be for 280 square metres outside of defined town centres. That's based on analysis that's set out in the reason justification, and that comes from the evidence study.
So that needs to be in the policy. That's the test for.
Yeah, I think it's been moved up.
We need to put that in there.
Yeah.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. Councillor Sargent.
I just wanted to kind of labour the point on the Pips Hill areas. As the officer said, they are extremely popular, but you said they're not part of the hierarchy, the shopping.
That's correct, yes. Under national policy, they're not considered as town centres, although they are retail destinations in their own right from a landowner and a corporate perspective, and they do make a valued offer to the overall composition of the borough.
Because, you know, the point I wanted to make is that they are absolutely vital, because they are, you can't get anywhere near them parking on a weekend. So I mean, they prove, you know, they do prove their value, don't they? And And I think it's because of that sometimes that it's difficult to get the town centres back into action again. But I think the officer's offer is different from what is on the out-of-town centres than that in a town centre, and maybe that needs to be kind of put somewhere so that it's understanding where, you know, what a town centre offer looks like, so that we can grow our own town centres.
Yeah, there's some very good points there. Some of that discussion is found within the retail and leisure needs study, so we wouldn't need to replicate that within the policy document. But yeah, there are a number of challenges that are created by that. I think the fundamental takeaway message, if you like, from this would be if we didn't have a policy that looked to direct retail and leisure users towards town centres in the first instance, the town centre first approach that government policy sets out, the market demand for space on the retail parks, not just in Basildon but plenty of other towns and cities as well, particularly where there are questions around whether the mix and the size of retail units is appropriate for the needs of occupiers. You know, it's likely there'd be demand to expand retail parks, but then nobody would want that because it would kill off town centres per se, as we've known them.
Thanks, Robert. That's great. Okay, anything more on R3? No, okay. Let's move on to R4. So again, out of town retail and leisure parks. Anything on that we haven't already covered? No? Yes, Councillor Miles?
Just briefly about, obviously, out-of-town leisure parks, but obviously out-of-town retail, it sort of does tie into the previous R3 policy for the location of new retail outside of town centres. So I'm just wondering why sort of doubling up on retail in two particular policies rather than just having R4 for leisure parks.
Yeah, that's a reasonable question. I think we've gone with two because what we do in R4 is to name check the key destinations. The policy principle is identical. I think R3 is more, rather than dealing with the parks themselves, R3 is perhaps more specifically oriented towards Class E and trying to pick up some of the changes from that. The issue when the use class order was revised 4 years ago now was that it fused some main town centre uses with non-town centre. So there is the potential for some developers then to sidestep those sequential impacts requirements and change it. Well, when you have premises that are in Class E and they change to another Class E use, it's not classed as development. So that's really where we're going with that one. There could be scope to have it as the same policy, but I think just in terms of legibility, at least at this point, it would be better for us to separate those two issues because I think there is a slight difference in emphasis.
Okay, yeah. Sorry.
So carry on, Councillor Miles.
I do agree. I mean, it even references policy R3 in R4. Obviously about the sequential testing, but obviously R3 does set out, quite a bit of it about the. Sorry, excuse me. Paragraph 2 of R3, sequential testing would be required for planning applications for main town centre uses. But we're just sort of repeating ourselves in R4, and obviously with leisure parks is slightly different because we're talking about something quite large. I don't particularly sit comfortable with this particular policy. Doesn't have any sort of detail other than just saying that sequential assessment needs to be done as set out in policy R3. So I'm finding policy R4 a little bit redundant. I just wondered whether or not we can kind of get the meaning right on what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Reasonable point. I think we can take that away and look at that.
Yeah, I can see what you're getting at Councillor Myers, yeah. Okay, R5 hotels. So anyone like to come in on the hotel policy? No? So just a few comments from me here. In the opening sentence, we talk about visitor economy. And I just wonder whether we might want to consider tweaking that wording, because I thought obviously one of the key things that are... Have we changed it already, Christine?
Employment and leisure.
Right, okay, sorry, that's a redundant question then. I think the point I was going to make was, I think it's as important, if not more so, that the hotel capacity in the region supports our business, economic growth and development requirements, as it does. I mean, the word visitor economy implies tourism to me, but I think it is as important that we cater for business needs. I mean, an example would be, sorry to go back to Ford Dunton, but obviously Ford Dunton's major competitor is not in Basildon Borough. In fact, it's not even in the UK. It's in North Rhine-Westphalia in Cologne. And that has a massive hotel capacity to support its existence. So I think it's really key that we make sure that our hotel capacity does support our business need. And kind of on that point, again, we're talking about town centres here, which is fine, but are we going to get the hotel capacity we need by insisting on people locate in a certain location? I mean, is the way we describe protecting or hotel, new hotel locations going to be consistent with what hotel organisations are actually prepared to invest in?
Ford Dunton, they don't stay in Basildon, they stay in Brentwood, where the hotels are of higher class. Those executives just don't stay in Basildon.
Exactly.
So based on that, following our discussion the other day, we're looking at the council will ensure that employment and leisure economy is supported through appropriate hotel provision. And I think the issue of B is that it does sort of say that require new hotels be located within or immediately joining the borough's town centres, the A127 corridor, and support business development or within other areas where a new hotel would support the function of the area. So I think that is covered. I think we just need to take out visitor economy and add in employment and leisure. I think we hit it with both of that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's it for that section then. So moving on to climate change. Any observations people would like to make on policy CC1, responding to climate change? No? Okay. So CC2, flood risk? No? Councillor Sargent.
Addressing flood risk, I'm kind of, when you think of developments, and some of the development that will be coming forward, and I've brought this up in planning applications before, we concrete too much over our boroughs. We are going to be in for lots of flood risk, and most of the larger developments that are granted permission within the past year, most of them have attenuation basins, or is it, what do they call it? Swales?
Suds.
No, I know it's sustainable drain, but I mean, they've got one over in the Langdon on the old school site, and the proposed one at Note Bridge, there's one proposed at Note Bridge, but there are others. And when you think of this could be the future of larger development, that to prevent it, that you're having to have large areas of the land preventing flood risk. And to me, this takes finances away from infrastructure because it's costly to put in those attenuation basins and swales. And well, that's that's what my thoughts are, and maybe someone can. I've just got concerns. Yes, we need to address flood risk, but we also need to address densities, the larger densities on housing, and where we put the actual buildings. But I'm happy to hear what officers have got to say on that.
I mean, in the recent applications that we're dealing with, and then obviously we're dealing with we've been dealing with quite a number have gone through. The importance that we're seeing actually of the SUDs, and especially when we're looking at the SUD basins, is the fact that they are looking at increasing the green and the biodiversity on our sites. So actually there are benefits of those areas, and they're taken into consideration when we look at housing numbers anyway. So the schemes that are going to come forward will make assessment of that. So I think the change in the way we deliver the urban drainage systems actually is improving the quality of developments that we're looking at, because they are these areas of either part water or no water for the majority of the year. They actually adding you're putting back some degree of green space back onto these sites. So I would say that we would look at we have to deal with 1 in 100 plus 30% that have to deal with on all sites, and that's the calculations we have to deal with. Some developers will use the milk crate, not milk crates, but actually the plastic crates under car parks and things to hold the water there. But some use a mixture of the water holding under built forms, or they use the swales and the urban drainage systems to deal with it. So that's how the sites come forward, and the sites will react better to flooding once they're built out than they do at the moment. So but we will get them on all schemes.
Do you think we need to change the policy, Councillor Sargent, I suppose is the question based on your observations?
Thanks for that, Chairman. I do appreciate that. I understand what Christine is saying, but my whole point is that that's the way that we are having to deal with development on sites. And when it's on every site, because really, rather than having a swale or an attenuation basin or whatever they're called, you could have just a nice bit of green where the kids can all run around on. Because these areas, you can't go in them, can you? They can't be used.
Well, it depends whether if they're actually some of the schemes some of them are water, constantly have water in them, and some of them don't. And if they don't have water in them, they'll be dry majority of the year. So they're only there for the extreme flooding. Ones where you've got water in usually all year round are ones which deal with the lower level rainfalls. All they do is they just hold the water, and then once the event's gone, they let it slowly back into the system. So it's just controlling what water goes into the strategic drainage basin. So it is a way of just controlling that. So I mean, I get your point of the fact that there's a viability issue. It's not a viability issue because the number of units they have on the sites have to take account of all the needs of that site before they can get down to the number of units they need. So I don't think it affects the viability. All it will do is just mean that the sites come forward in a different format. So you might end up with a slightly denser site to allow that green to impact the way those sites come forward. And we've seen that on a number of schemes that are coming forward at the moment.
I can't be the only one that's thinking in the way that I am, but I totally get it from a planning point of view. I totally get that, but I'm just making the point that they're going on far too many developments to deal with flooding. can do something in the policy to even mention it, it would be helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Westwick.
So I come from a horticultural background, working on new developments, Red Row estates. Swells, very similar to what you were saying as well, they are left dry. And we find when we're on site at these certain areas, children are still playing in the swells when it's bone dry. So I understand what you're saying, Councillor Sargent, as well about the green spaces, but children are still out playing in the swells that are left dry. But I do know where your concern is coming from. But like I said, where we maintain a lot of these sites, we do see a lot of children from all ages playing in the dry swells.
Thank you, Councillor Westwick. Okay, so, oh sorry, Councillor Myers. Sorry, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So, based on this addressing flood risk, I do agree with actually both Councillor Sargent and Councillor Westwick in terms of sort of the swales that are normally dry and they're there for an emergency. I do understand that, but obviously with some of the attenuation basins, it does take up a lot of open land where they sort of, you know, make pretty much like a swamp half the time. But it doesn't, not particularly nice little lake or pond or anything like that. It's just just swampland, mushy, horrible at the bottom of the development. Sometimes it can be quite large. But I'm reading here, obviously, talking to you, working in partnership with water authorities and whatever. But obviously, Anglian Water has quite a lot of facilities in the borough. It has a space over in Wickford, over A127, and obviously over in Pitsea as well, and Langdon. It has quite a large sort of sewage outflow kind of area. Just wondering, based on the calculations that have been done for the number of houses, whether or not Anglian Water are aware of what's been proposed for 20 years' time, and whether or not they're prepared to put in the necessary infrastructure for sewerage and drainage that would be needed going forwards, because they look at each individual application as it comes along, as all outside authorities do. I just wondered whether or not in this document, where it says having a working in partnership with the water authorities, whether or not this 20-year plan for up to 27,000 houses to be built would actually mean that they start building more capacity in the sewer network.
Lisa, yeah, thank you.
So as part of the infrastructure delivery plan, we will be liaising with all infrastructure providers, including Anglian Water. We do liaise with them regularly. Generally yearly, they get an updated trajectory from us on what we expect to be delivering, and having the local plan in place for the first time will give much more security to that trajectory, so they can clearly understand what to expect in year 1, year 5, year 10, so on. But as part of the infrastructure plan, we will meet with them, we will identify what is needed, and that will be costed. And that again, as Christine's mentioned, that will be viability tested against each allocation.
So, CC3 washlands, any questions or comments on that? Okay. And then I think this is the point where your question about, or the question about heat pumps, etc., came in. So CC4, net zero carbon development. Any observations on that one? Councillor Myers.
Thank you. So obviously, I did bring this up earlier. It was based on one of the objectives that we were talking about at the start of the meeting, but obviously we want to make sure that housing, employment areas, new retail parks, etc., should have all of this stuff, all this kit on board to begin with. We hear time and time again from other authorities, ourselves included, with building a solar farm on arable grassland and agricultural land that's temporary, and the temporariness is 40 years. So yeah, it's not particularly temporary in most people's eyes. that can potentially power, say, 10 to 12,000 houses. Well, if you had them on the roof of 10 to 12,000 houses, it wouldn't need to be built in the first place. So to keep our fields open. So I think that a lot of these plans in here are quite good. I mean, I don't know whether or not there's any extra work that needs to be done on these based on any potential new government legislation that comes out on net zero, because who knows what may change in the next 6 to 8 months. But I think it's a fairly good start to making sure that the properties that are going to be built and the employment zones that may be created, that this is a policy where they have to comply or go without. So I think it's quite a good one.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay, last policy, I think. In that case, so C5, just scrolling down to that. So embodied carbon, net zero carbon development, embodied carbon. Any observations on that one? It is on 89.
It's under
It's
construction.
third to last page, I
It's
think.
under construction policy, I think.
Any takers? No? Right. I think we are done then. Sorry. So close. Councillor Myers.
Just an observation on the climate change and everything else is that I didn't see, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I know it's currently existing policy, but obviously carrying forward the use of swift bird boxes and things like that on residential developments, because obviously these do come into sort of environmental and climate change sort of policies. Reading sort of the headlines and everything else, I didn't see that those would be included as they currently are, because we quite like that sort of thing. And my colleague, Councillor Schrader, if he's watching this, would probably tell me off if I didn't mention it, as he brought it in, along with perhaps some bee bricks and whatnot on new developments.
Do we need a bird box policy? Is that what you're saying?
It's currently in place, but yeah.
Okay, Steph.
Yeah, I'm currently working on the environmental policy chapter, so I can make sure that that's included. No problem.
Okay, all done. Well, everybody, thank you so much for your contribution. I think we've actually made it inside 3 hours, which is a pretty good effort given what we've had to cover. So thank you all very much for attending and your contribution, and wish you a safe journey home.